One, two, one, two, three, four.
Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dagger, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Keatron Evans. He is the managing partner at KM Cybersecurity, a global information security consulting business which includes penetration testing, incident response management and consulting, digital forensics, and training. Keatron is also a senior security advisor at Savvius and a top-rated instructor for ISACA and ISACA. He is also one of the authors of Chained Exploits, Advancing Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish, a textbook still used by the U.S. government security agencies. Keatron, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Well, we always think, though, that there's this powerful state, like the Russians hacking the DNC, Democratic National Party. But why does the average business, I guess, need to understand cybersecurity? I mean, so what? I mean, people aren't after my manufacturing data, are they?
Well, they are. Actually, one of the things that's changed as well over the years is if you look at China, for example, and some of the other threats, China actually has a stated mission. The government has a stated and written and documented mission to basically steal as much intellectual property from us and other developed countries as they possibly can. So they actually have a coordinated mission and they have money behind it. They actually have a division of their military whose mission it is to actually steal as much information as they can from U.S. and other companies. And this includes things that we consider to be as benign as manufacturing information and things like that. Because even with manufacturing, there's trade secrets, there's intellectual property that this manufacturing company wouldn't want their competitors to know as far as, how they do this process or how they get certain types of business. So those things are definitely targets. And more importantly than that, what happens is you as a manufacturing, let's say you're a small manufacturing company, you might end up being a proxy or a pawn for a threat agent to attack a government official or a government organization, for example. And they'll use your network and your computing devices as kind of like pawns so that when the government does their forensics, it looks like you did the attack. So that's one thing that smaller companies or people that say, oh, well, they're not after my data. Maybe not, but you have resources. And those resources are just a channel that they can hop into and use to attack other places and kind of mask their identity via you. So that's definitely another thing you have to be concerned with as well. And if you're a public company, you have regulations where you have to be worried about cybersecurity, because if your data gets stolen and it causes the price of that company's shares to drop, then the shareholders have a libel suit against you because now you're responsible actually legally for maintaining some level of security. And this goes for hospitals and health insurance places. They have something called HIPAA. That's a regulation that says that basically if you have medical information, you're responsible for securing it. Same for any business that takes credit cards as a form of payment. There's something called PCI. That's a regulatory thing that requires you to maintain a certain level of cybersecurity in order to be able to take credit cards. So it's becoming a very regulated thing. If you think about the recent grilling of Mark Zuckerberg with Congress when they had that committee to grill him, the Equifax breach that happened last year, which is probably one of the biggest in history, there was an entire congressional hearing about that breach, and they were, the CEO and some other people had to answer some really tough questions about why they didn't have these controls in place. So I think everybody has to be worried about it to some extent. Some places more than others, but everybody has kind of a responsibility now to do some things.
You really brought up two different questions for me that I thought about, and one is that being that pawn, that's a lot about what your original book was about, Chained Exploits, wasn't it? It was like, there's just a chain going on and a method. It's kind of like a mind map, a concept map of how someone actually gets compromised, right?
That's absolutely what it was about. Sure. And that's one of the big things. So yeah, that's a good connect there.
In that, the other thing that you bring up is that when you talk about government regulation and everything, the first thing that jumps to my mind is, you know, we have these OSHA inspections for safety and health and these things. Are we that far away from having data inspections that we have to meet and get reported on? Is that something that is like, you know, out there in the future, or is it now and I don't even know it?
I mean, yeah, well, it's closer to that it's now and you don't know it. You know, that was recently something that's more of an international thing called GDRP. Now, it was mostly spearheaded by Europeans, but a lot, you know, it's affecting us here in the U.S. as well. But what the things that I named, HIPAA, GLB for banks, SOX for public traded companies, they do have requirements to have a security audit or a penetration test, which is one of the services we provide. They're required legally to have one of those done, depending on the regulation, once a year, once a quarter, every time you make a significant change to the network or to the data structure, you have to have things retested. So there are regulations already in place that require organizations to have at least a yearly penetration test and security audit done.
Well, I would like to thank you very much. What's the best way for someone to contact you? Is it through your website?
They can reach me on the website, or they can also just reach me at kevans@kmcybersecurity.com.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Keatron. I find it feel very fascinating. This podcast will be available on the Business 901 iTunes Store and the Business 901 website. So I want to thank all the listeners for listening.
All right. Thank you, Joe.